Nobody in the hearing room was ready for the way Jasmine Crockett walked in. Not the aides lining the walls, not the lobbyists who'd flown in to whisper in the right ears, and definitely not Mitch McConnell himself. It wasn't the usual Capitol Hill spectacle, no cameras flashing in a choreographed frenzy. Just a low, anxious hum as people sensed something was about to break. McConnell sat behind the polished mahogany table in his dark suit, the same patient half-smile he'd worn through decades of power plays. His staffer leaned in and murmured something about staying composed. He nodded slowly, as if nothing could touch him. But when Jasmine took her seat across from him, the energy shifted, like a storm moving in so quietly you didn't realize you were soaked until it was too late. "Senator McConnell," she began, her tone level, almost casual, "I want to thank you for agreeing to this hearing." A few reporters lifted their brows. She didn't sound like she was about to ask polite questions. McConnell tilted his head, fingers folded neatly on the table. "Of course, Congresswoman. I'm always glad to clarify any misconceptions." Jasmine's eyes didn't flicker. "Good," she said, and reached into her bag. She pulled out a thick manila folder and laid it flat in front of her, the label printed in block letters, "Correspondence, McConnell, Donor Group 22. Every whisper in the room died. Even McConnell's smirk slipped for half a second. "You're probably familiar with this," Jasmine said evenly. "Letters and emails detailing conversations between your office and several corporate entities that, interestingly enough, received billions in federal contracts." She slid the folder a few inches closer to the mic, "And I want to make sure the American people get to hear exactly what you promised them." McConnell's jaw twitched. He glanced at his counsel, who shifted uncomfortably. It was the tiniest movement, but it told the whole room this was no ordinary political theater. Jasmine kept going. "For years," she said, voice rising just enough to carry, "you've stood behind a carefully crafted persona, the elder statesman, the steady hand. But behind closed doors, you were orchestrating something else entirely." A staffer in the back almost dropped his tablet. McConnell tried to speak, but Jasmine cut him off with a single sentence that froze everyone in their chairs. "You're just a puppet," she said, her voice soft but deadly clear. "And today, we're going to see exactly whose hand is up your back." Nobody breathed. And that was only the beginning. The silence after Jasmine's words was so thick it felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath. McConnell's gaze darted across the room, searching for any familiar face to give him a lifeline, a look that said, "Help me shut this down." But no one moved. Even his closest aides seemed pinned in place, as if they were waiting to see how much worse this could get. Jasmine didn't rush. She rested her palm on the folder and spoke into the microphone, her voice calm and unhurried. "I'm not here today because I enjoy confrontation. I'm here because the American people deserve more than carefully packaged lies." Her other hand reached into her bag again, this time retrieving a stack of printed emails, each page marked with a neon tag. She held up the first one so the cameras could zoom in. "July 16, 2022, she read. "An email from your senior policy director to the CEO of Eastridge Logistics. In it, he confirms that, quote, the senator has no objections to the contract allocation provided additional commitments to campaign support are met." A collective intake of breath. McConnell cleared his throat, voice suddenly more brittle than before. "Congresswoman, I'm not aware of the context of that correspondence." Jasmine nodded, like she'd been expecting that exact evasion. "Of course you're not. It's always convenient to claim ignorance when the receipts finally come out." She set the email face up on the table and slid the next document from the stack. "November 3, 2022, she continued. "A memo from your chief of staff outlining a, quote, strategic donor assurance plan designed to ensure your re-election funding. In exchange, a series of legislative delays that conveniently stalled infrastructure funding for thousands of working families." McConnell opened his mouth again, but no words came out. He shut it slowly, as if realizing any denial would only make the footage play on loop across every news network by nightfall. Jasmine turned to the committee members watching in stunned disbelief. "I know some of you will call this politics as usual," she said. "But let's be clear, this isn't politics. This is a betrayal of public trust so deep it borders on criminal." She lifted her gaze back to McConnell, and the camera caught the moment his mask cracked, a flicker of something that looked a lot like fear. "You've spent decades telling the country you're the adult in the room," Jasmine said, her voice tightening, "but when it comes down to it, you're just a puppet. And I think it's time we see exactly who's been pulling the strings." McConnell swallowed hard. He knew the headlines were already writing themselves. The committee chair cleared his throat, as if desperate to regain control. But it was too late. Jasmine wasn't finished. She leaned forward, her hands pressed flat against the folder brimming with evidence, and said quietly, "I didn't come here to debate. I came here to end the illusion." In living rooms across America, people leaned closer to their screens, hearts pounding. And in that hearing room, for the first time in a very long time, Mitch McConnell had nothing to say. Outside the hearing room, reporters were already firing off headlines. Inside, you could practically feel the temperature drop. Jasmine didn't soften her gaze. She didn't lower her voice. Every syllable came out with surgical precision. "Senator," she began, flipping to another set of documents, "do you remember this?" She held up a photo, projected onto the screens behind her, McConnell in a closed-door meeting, flanked by executives from 3 defense contractors. The date stamp glowed beneath the image, August 14, 2022. "You sat in this room," Jasmine said, her tone a notch colder, "and assured these companies that their contracts would remain untouched, provided their PACs continued to fund your political apparatus." McConnell exhaled sharply. "This is an incomplete representation." "No," Jasmine cut in. "It's exactly what it looks like." The committee chamber was silent except for the quiet scratch of pens racing to record every word. "You've built a career on the myth of steady leadership," she continued, "but the reality is you've been bargaining away people's futures to preserve your own power." She lifted her eyes, locking onto him. "And you didn't even do it discreetly." McConnell looked down at his hands. They weren't as steady as they'd been when the hearing began. Jasmine turned to the audience. "Every time a working family in Kentucky lost their health coverage, every time a small business folded because relief funds never arrived, every time someone asked why nothing ever changed, it came back to moments like this." She tapped the photo with one finger. "Private promises. Public denials." Then she leaned in closer to her mic, her voice softening but somehow gaining weight. "This isn't about party. It's about character. And yours, Senator, is as hollow as the justifications you keep recycling." Somewhere in the back, an aide whispered, "God, she's not stopping." And she wasn't. Jasmine carefully replaced the photo and pulled out a single handwritten letter, yellowed, creased, obviously read many times. "This was from a constituent," she said. "A woman named Carla, whose husband died waiting for benefits your office promised to expedite. She wrote you 3 times. She never heard back." She paused, letting the words echo. "That's what happens when a man calls himself a leader but lives as a puppet." McConnell's lips parted, but no sound emerged. Jasmine folded the letter with reverence and set it on the stack of evidence. "Today," she said, her voice suddenly calm again, "we're going to read every one of these records into the record. Because you don't get to hide behind titles anymore." The entire chamber felt like it was holding a collective breath, waiting to see if he would even try to fight back. And in living rooms across the country, people who had never paid attention to congressional hearings before were glued to their screens. Because for once, someone was saying the part everyone else was too afraid to say. It wasn't just the cameras capturing every word anymore, it was the thousands of phones held up by aides, interns, even staffers from McConnell's own party. Because something unprecedented was happening, Jasmine wasn't just questioning policy. She was unmasking an entire legacy. McConnell's voice finally emerged, strained. "Congresswoman, you're conflating isolated incidents with a broader narrative." Jasmine held up a hand, and the room fell instantly silent. "I'm not conflating anything," she said. "I'm connecting the dots you tried to scatter." She lifted another document, an internal memo labeled Strategic Obstruction Plan, and laid it flat in front of the mic so the cameras could zoom in. "This memo," she said, her voice tight with quiet fury, "details the timeline you personally approved to delay legislation until after the midterms. Not because it was flawed policy, but because you believed withholding relief would serve your electoral strategy." McConnell's mouth opened and closed, a silent protest that never fully formed. Meanwhile, Jasmine went on, families were evicted. Children went hungry. Small towns were gutted. And you called it politics. She glanced at the audience, her eyes sweeping the faces of stunned staffers and stone-faced lobbyists. "I call it moral bankruptcy." Her words hit like a hammer. McConnell shifted in his chair. "Congresswoman, with respect." "No," she cut in, her tone sharpening. "You don't get to use that word." She leaned forward until every syllable landed with deliberate force. "Respect is something you earn by serving the people who trusted you. Not by trading their well-being for another term in office." A low murmur rippled across the chamber. Someone in the back whispered, "She's ending him." But Jasmine wasn't done. She reached for a small stack of postcards, each handwritten, each signed by a voter who'd once believed in McConnell. "One more thing," she said, her voice lowering to a register that made the room lean in. "These are from Kentuckians who sent you their stories. Some were Democrats. Some were Republicans. All of them had one thing in common, they believed you cared." She held the stack up. "You didn't even answer." McConnell swallowed, his jaw tight. Jasmine tapped the postcards against the folder, her voice softening, not with pity, but with resolve. "You built a reputation on steadiness," she said. "But the truth is you were just steady in one thing, protecting yourself." Her eyes locked onto his. "And after today, you don't get to pretend otherwise." No one dared to interrupt her. And somewhere beyond that chamber, in union halls and diners and living rooms across America, people were watching with their hearts beating faster. Because for the first time, someone had looked Mitch McConnell in the eye and called the whole game what it was. For a heartbeat, McConnell looked almost smaller in his chair. The man who'd maneuvered presidents and senators alike suddenly seemed like a relic of something brittle and outdated. Jasmine didn't move. She let the silence sprawl across the chamber until it pressed against every person in the room. Then she spoke, quietly, with a clarity that cut sharper than any accusation. "You've called yourself a servant of the people," she said, "but you only ever served the ones who could pay for access." McConnell's counsel shifted in his seat, flipping through papers as if searching for any procedural escape hatch. But there was none. Jasmine held up a final piece of paper, an internal audit summary stamped confidential. "This," she said, "is your record." She read, her voice calm. "The Senator's office maintains an engagement structure prioritizing high-value donors, creating targeted legislative delays to incentivize contributions." Her eyes didn't leave McConnell's face. "Translated," she said, "that means you played chicken with American lives so you could stockpile campaign cash." McConnell's throat bobbed. His hand moved to adjust his tie, but stopped halfway. "And when your staff sent these instructions," Jasmine continued, "you signed off on every line." The tension was suffocating now. Even the committee chair had stopped trying to intervene. Jasmine slowly set the document down. "You don't get to lecture this country about fiscal responsibility, Senator," she said, her voice tightening. "Not when you ran your career like a protection racket." A staffer behind McConnell finally bent his head, unable to watch any longer. Jasmine folded her hands, letting her tone soften just enough to feel human. "I didn't come here to humiliate you," she said. "I came here to make sure the people you ignored finally get the truth." McConnell opened his mouth again. No sound came out. She waited. When it was clear he had nothing left to say, she continued, her voice resolute. "This is the reckoning you thought you'd never face." And in that moment, captured on 100 cameras, live-streamed across every major network, the illusion of Mitch McConnell as the unshakable old guard collapsed under the weight of his own record. But Jasmine wasn't finished. Not yet. Because beyond the headlines and the viral clips, there was still something she had to say, something that would make it impossible for anyone watching to look away. Jasmine took a slow breath. The room felt as if it were holding itself perfectly still, afraid any movement might break the spell of truth she'd just cast. Then she looked straight at the cameras, past McConnell, past the rows of silent aides, past the marble walls, and spoke as if she were standing in a Union Hall in Kentucky, not the Capitol. "People watching this might think I'm here because I hate you," she began, her voice steady. "But hate isn't why I'm sitting in this chair." McConnell blinked, as if surprised by the softness in her tone. "I'm here," Jasmine continued, "because I've seen what happens when politicians treat public service like a business deal. When they call desperation partisan noise and pretend suffering is someone else's problem." She held up one of the postcards again, just a flimsy rectangle of paper, but in her hand it felt heavier than any dossier. "This is what gets lost when you spend 30 years behind closed doors," she said. "You forget that every policy you stall, every vote you barter, has a face." Her gaze moved across the committee dais. A father working 2 jobs who can't afford insulin. A grandmother who lost her pension while you gave tax breaks to her employer. A kid eating dinner out of a vending machine because his parents can't cover rent and groceries. Jasmine swallowed, but she didn't break eye contact. "That's why this moment matters," she said. "Because if no one ever calls it what it is, a betrayal, then it becomes normal." McConnell shifted again, but his eyes didn't lift from the table. "Senator," Jasmine continued, her voice gaining strength with every word, "you built your power by counting on Americans to stay too tired or too divided to question you." She tapped the stack of evidence in front of her. "But the truth has a way of surviving your excuses." A hush fell so complete you could hear the soft whir of the camera lenses refocusing. "And if nothing else," Jasmine said, her tone now a calm finality, "I want people to remember that someone finally said it to your face." McConnell didn't look up. And in living rooms across the country, millions of people exhaled all at once, like they'd been waiting years for someone to speak this plainly. But Jasmine still had more to give them. Because this wasn't just about McConnell. It was about every person who'd ever been told their pain was too inconvenient to matter. A long moment passed. Nobody dared to move. Finally, Jasmine gathered the stack of letters and documents she'd laid out over the last hour. She tapped them into a neat pile, the sound of the pages aligning almost thunderous in the hush. She spoke without looking at McConnell this time, her voice rising just enough that anyone listening at home could feel it in their chest. "I want every American watching this to understand something," she began. "Nothing I said today was radical. Nothing I said was even new." Her eyes flicked to the cameras. "It's just that too many people have gotten used to pretending this isn't how the game works." McConnell's hand flexed against the table. Jasmine didn't acknowledge him. "You can wrap corruption in tradition," she continued. "You can call it seniority or bipartisanship or the way it's always been. But it doesn't change the fact that millions of people have paid the price for this charade." She lifted the final postcard, Carla's, and held it up where every lens could see it. "This is who I'm here for," she said. "Not the donors. Not the lobbyists. Not the political consultants who think public service is just a brand to polish." Jasmine's voice went quiet, so quiet the microphone had to catch up. "I'm here for Carla. A reporter near the back of the gallery wiped her eyes. Jasmine laid the postcard down like it was something sacred. "And I will not apologize for making you uncomfortable," she said, her voice now a blade of calm steel. "Because comfort is exactly what let this rot spread so far." McConnell finally looked up. His mouth opened, searching for something to say that wouldn't sound hollow in the face of all she'd laid bare. But there was nothing left to say. Jasmine didn't wait for a reply. She stacked the rest of her papers, tucked them under her arm, and turned toward the exit. As she walked out of the chamber, the entire room stayed frozen, no applause, no protests, just a stunned, ringing silence. And in that silence, you could feel something breaking apart, the illusion that power would never be challenged, that no one would ever call it what it was. Outside the chamber, the marble hallway was lined with reporters. As Jasmine stepped through the doors, a dozen microphones shot toward her, all clamoring at once. "Congresswoman, do you believe today marks the end of McConnell's influence? Do you fear retribution from leadership? Will you be calling for formal censure?" Jasmine stopped just long enough to let their questions hang in the air. She looked past the microphones, past the cameras, until her eyes found a young staffer, barely 20, clutching a recorder to her chest with trembling hands. She spoke softly, but it carried. "I don't care about retribution," she said. "And I don't care if this costs me some comfortable alliances." A hush fell over the entire press corps. "I care that for once, the people who paid the price for this system got to hear the truth spoken out loud." A murmur swept the hallway, journalists checking their feeds, realizing Jasmine's testimony had already exploded across every platform. In the first 5 minutes alone, clips were shared by teachers' unions, veterans groups, nurses' associations, people who hadn't agreed on anything in years, but who suddenly felt like someone had given them permission to stop pretending everything was fine. One reporter lowered his mic, almost reverent. "Congresswoman," he asked, voice low, "what do you hope happens next?" Jasmine's eyes didn't flinch. "I hope people realize this isn't about left or right," she said. "It's about whether you think the truth still matters more than the perks of power." The reporter swallowed, nodded, and stepped back. Jasmine turned, her heels echoing on the polished floor as she walked away without another word. Inside the chamber, McConnell remained seated alone, staring down at the pile of evidence she'd left behind, each page a mirror he could no longer avoid. By nightfall, Jasmine's confrontation had overtaken every major news cycle. Cable anchors replayed her closing words on loop. Pundits who had once called her inexperienced, now called her the conscience of the chamber. But it wasn't the headlines that mattered. It was the quiet places her words were landing. In a diner outside Louisville, a waitress stood behind the counter, her phone propped against a salt shaker. She watched Jasmine lean into the microphone and say, "Comfort is exactly what let this rot spread so far." Her eyes filled. She didn't look away. In a hospital break room in Cincinnati, 3 nurses huddled over a tablet replaying the moment Jasmine read Carla's postcard. One of them whispered, "She's saying what we've all been thinking." And in 100 other places, union halls, classrooms, church basements, ordinary people sat forward in their chairs. Because someone had finally spoken the truth without blinking. Inside McConnell's office, the mood was frantic. Aides shuffled damage control memos, fielded calls from donors, whispered about whether he could survive the blow. But he sat motionless at his desk, replaying the hearing on a muted screen, Jasmine's face frozen mid-sentence. "I'm here for Carla." It was a line he would never be able to escape. Meanwhile, Jasmine sat alone in her office, the lights low, her phone buzzing with thousands of unread messages. She closed her eyes, took a breath, and thought of her mother, the woman who'd raised her to believe that telling the truth was worth any consequence. A knock came at her door. A young staffer poked her head in, eyes wide. "Congresswoman," she said, voice trembling, "you need to see this." She turned the tablet around. A video had already racked up 10 million views. Just Jasmine's calm voice, explaining that comfort is the enemy of accountability. And under it, thousands of comments. I feel seen. She's not just talking to Congress. She's talking to us. More of this. Jasmine felt her throat tighten, not with fear, but with certainty. This was bigger than her. And it wasn't stopping now. Hours later, as midnight came and went, the Capitol grew quiet. Jasmine finally stepped out into the cold air, the marble columns towering behind her. A few reporters were still camped on the steps, hoping she'd say something else. She paused, took one look back at the building that had tried to bury so many truths under procedure and decorum, and then faced the cameras. No prepared remarks. No notes. Just her voice. I know some people will say today was too harsh, she said, her breath visible in the winter air. That calling out corruption in plain language is somehow uncivil. Her tone didn't waver. But let me be clear, polite silence is what kept this system broken for decades. She looked directly into the nearest lens, her eyes fierce. If you are watching this and you've ever been told that your pain didn't matter, that your struggle was your own fault, that you weren't worth fighting for, remember this moment. Jasmine took a step closer to the cameras. Because the most dangerous lie in Washington isn't partisanship, she continued, her voice now a steady, undeniable truth. It's the story powerful people tell themselves that no one will ever dare to say out loud what they've done. A hush fell so total it felt like the whole city was listening. Well, she said, her tone soft but unbreakable, someone just did. She turned, walked down the steps, and disappeared into the waiting night, her footsteps echoing behind her like the last notes of a song too honest to forget. And in living rooms, on factory floors, in classrooms and corner stores across America, people didn't just see a politician. They saw a mirror. A reminder. A promise that no matter how long it took, the truth would find its voice. And just like that. Tonight wasn't about a headline or a viral clip. It was about the truth finally walking into a room that had spent decades pretending it didn't exist. Jasmine Crockett didn't stand there to score points. She stood there because someone had to. Someone had to look power in the eye and say, enough. If you're watching this and you've ever felt unseen, like your story didn't count, remember this moment. Remember that no matter how polished the lies, how rehearsed the excuses, the truth has a way of showing up anyway. It only takes one voice to crack the walls of denial. And tonight, that voice was loud enough that none of us can pretend we didn't hear it. This isn't the end. It's the start of something bigger. Stay awake. Stay engaged. And never forget. Real change doesn't wait for permission. Thank you for watching. Let's keep going.